Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us. We'll wait just a minute for anyone who's joining us, but we already have a good number here with us. And just for your awareness, the session is being recorded. So if you can't make the whole session or you want to share with colleagues who couldn't join, we can share that link to the recording afterwards. I still see some participants joining us now, but let's get started to be on time, and they can join when they can. A big welcome to everyone. Hi, my name's Natalie, and welcome to the session today. We have actually colleagues joining us from different UN system libraries, and also many attendees signed up from the Library of Congress. So a warm welcome to our UN colleagues, a special welcome to everyone from the Library of Congress who's taken their time to be here today. Because of the diversity of people joining us, I'll briefly introduce who we are so you know where you are today. Together with my colleague Nivat Novasco, you can see on the screen, we work for the Knowledge and Learning Commons, which is the short word we like to call ourselves is the Commons, which is a part of the UN Library and Archives in Geneva. And if we kind of go back in our history, we were founded as the Library of the League of Nations in 1919. So we're the oldest library in the UN system. But today, as the Library and Archives of UN Geneva, we also house and manage the archives of the League of Nations. But our mission is to serve as a center for research and also be an instrument of understanding international relations and understanding multilateralism. Through the archives, also a lot of UN documents and books and other resources. The Commons is a more recent project. It's our space for knowledge sharing and informal learning on multilateralism. And this is through events like the one we're having today online. We also do in-person events and hybrid video projects that you can see on our YouTube channel and other products. And while our main audience for these kinds of sessions is diplomats, students of multilateralism, UN staff, we also do internal kind of sessions for our librarians and archivists in the system to better understand our professional environment and how we can learn from others. And so today's session is really part of that. We wanted this year to do sessions related to data literacy and digital literacy and AI. We recently held a session on data, and today we're looking at AI. So we reached out to our speakers today from the Library of Congress, thanks to our colleagues at the library who saw the active work they're doing on implementing AI and having a framework to really understand how we can implement ethically AI in libraries and archives. I'm so happy to introduce you to them in just a moment, but we'll quickly look at what we're going to be looking at today. What does AI mean for libraries and archives? How does it affect our work individually, but also as teams? How does it affect how we work and the user experience? We'll be looking today at some practical experiences from the Library of Congress as they test projects on AI as part of the LC Labs AI planning framework, which they'll outline and share with you in detail today. We also wanted to look at some strategies for responsible and ethical application of AI, because I guess as public institutions, this is very important for us to understand. As AI is all around us, it is part of our daily lives. What does it mean to implement it ethically and responsibly in the organizations we work for? And also key tips for getting started using AI in UN system libraries. So it's my pleasure to introduce you to our speakers, and we thank them so much for their time today. We have with us Abigail Potter. She is a Senior Innovation Specialist, and she leads initiatives in the LC Labs to explore applications of AI and machine learning in library operations. And she created the AI planning framework that I just mentioned to help staff be able to understand, measure, evaluate, and implement AI tools and services. Also joining us is Caroline Saikuchi. She's the Chief U.S. Programs Law and Literature Division at the Library of Congress, and she's overseeing national and international programs that provide metadata for the library and publishing sectors. And her connection to the AI space is collaborating with LC Labs to co-lead projects on AI that do experiments for cataloging workflows at the Library of Congress. And she's also very interested in the ethical application of AI and how we can improve the user experience. Caroline and Abigail, thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, I'll start.
Yeah.
Oh.
Before we share your slides, we wanted to do a quick poll with our audience. So it won't take you long, but we invite all of you to take part in the poll that we're going to launch now. Thank you, Nivert, for opening that up. You can toggle through the 4 questions yourselves using the arrow that you see on the screen. But what we wanted to do to help Abigail and Caroline today is kind of look at where we're at with AI. The first question being, how familiar are you with AI in the context of libraries and archives? Very familiar, somewhat familiar, or not familiar at all. All the answers are anonymous, so please feel free to answer as you are and as you wish. And if you are ready for the next question, you can toggle using the right arrow. I'll read through all the questions today as well. The second question is, are you currently using AI tools or technologies in your work? Whether in a personal capacity, as your team is using them, yes, extensively, yes, to some extent, or not at all. Our third question is a word cloud, so you can feel free to think of one word or a term. What do you see as the biggest challenge in implementing AI projects in libraries and archives? Perhaps it's time, perhaps it's understanding and digital literacy, knowing where to start, budget, anything that comes to mind that you think could be a challenge in starting and implementing AI projects. And then finally, what do you hope to take away from this session? Some practical insights and examples, understanding ethical implications, or guidance on starting AI projects. Feel free to select what would be most important for you today. And once you're done, you can hit send. Maybe for some of you, it's in French, envoyer. And so if you click on that, and then we'll take a look at the results. All right. Nivert, should we take a look at the results? So the major response for how familiar you are is somewhat familiar. So we've got attendees who are familiar, some very familiar, that's the smallest amount, and not familiar at all. So a bit of a mix across 3. When we look at, are you currently using AI tools? Yes, to some extent is the majority answer, 76%. What do you see as the biggest challenge? There's a lot of different terms here. Reliability is coming up as the major point though. Other terms are risk, information, is it ready for the public, technology gap, is the info we see there true? How does that work in terms of documents and publications? Time saving, management issues, reliability of information. So we've got a few things there. The main 2 words I think that I see are reliability and risk. And finally, what would you like to take away from the session? Practical insights and examples is the majority, but also the understanding of ethical implications. So Caroline and Abigail, I hope that was useful for you, and I pass the floor to you. You can share your screen, and thank you so much. Thanks to everyone for answering those questions.
Thank you. That's really interesting. Yeah. And Abby's gonna share her screen. Okay, fantastic. Again, I'm Caroline Sakuchi. I'm here with my colleague and friend, Abigail Potter, also known as Abby. So I'll be saying Abby every time I mention her. And we are delighted to speak with you today. We don't have to introduce ourselves. We've already done that. So we'll go ahead and go to the next slide.
Okay, so the library's been experimenting with machine learning since around 2018, mainly because we're really excited about we want to use it. Basically, we have challenges, real challenges in managing our information, in keeping keeping staffing levels up while budgets sort of lay flat, and just an ongoing deluge of information that's coming at us. Our collection is getting larger and larger, and the expectations of users are getting larger and larger for how they want to access information. So we really wanted to use machine learning and eventually AI to help us meet those challenges. And we did some experiments, and we sort of found some things out that sort of alongside of lots of other people who were doing experiments during that time, and found some particular challenges for using this technology. So a lot of, especially with our historic materials, the sort of wide-ranging cultural perspectives of our materials, a lot of these models, machine learning models, are not trained, are sort of not built for those, or aren't trained on historic material or cultural material, so they don't work as well. And then there's a lot of other implications to using the technology. So after some experiments, we started thinking about how to understand this technology, because we think of it as much like digitization that came before it, or digital preservation, that this is sort of the next wave of technology that libraries have to engage with and understand. And we're trying to create a pathway for us to understand it and other libraries who are also interested. So we have these three elements: data, model, people, where these are sort of the elements that we ground our understanding around. So the technology is very dependent on data, our collection data, how it's used as training data, the data that we provide when we validate or use it. Then there's the models. These are that's sort of an abstraction of all the sort of technical pieces that are coming together for this technology to work. And then, of course, there's the people who design the technology, who use the technology, who are represented in the content and in the data. So having these elements sort of help us think through how we want to adopt it. So we released this AI planning framework. The link here is on the bottom. We'll share these slides with you all if you're interested, but there's that blog post kind of explains it. But it has these three phases: understand, experiment, and implement. And basically the thought here is that you want to understand the use case, how you want to use the technology. You want to experiment with it. We are in we're in LC Labs. We are in a lab, so we use the word experiment. This could be, we try it out in a grant program, or we do a beta test. This word could be different, but basically we want to try it out before we implement it. And then when we implement it, we need to have sort of a lot of things in place. This next slide is kind of a zoom in of that, where we have our understand, experiment, implement phase. But then these are the activities that sort of happen in each of those phases. And in the understand phase, what you're doing is a lot of collaborating with your colleagues, assessing what you have. So looking at the particular use case, you want to use machine learning for cataloging. This is what we're going to talk about in detail today. So what are the risks and benefits there? Catalog records, our MARC records, are authoritative, information that's shared across the world. They're the backbone of our access system. So we have really high standards of quality and accuracy. So there's risks of error, and we have to really pay attention to those. Our principles and values, we want to establish those and be really clear about those. In this project that we'll talk about, we really want to center the catalogers, center their expertise, because they would have to use this technology, they would have to review the output, and we need them as core partners. So that was sort of a design principle overall for this experiment, to center the catalogers. We had to understand our data, what we had, what we could use, what we could experiment with, and then sort of look at the priorities overall, sort of map what our needs are and our expertise. And this is, really, this is not really technical work. This is really just sort of understanding what the needs are, what the risks are. And then we sort of move into experimentation, which we're going to talk about. But during this phase, we're really evaluating, we're documenting what we're learning, and we're taking our use case and we are using our real data, and then we're experimenting with it. We're looking at the output with our experts, And we are developing a baseline of quality of what are our standards for this particular use case. And then we are not in an implementation stage yet, but when we get to implementing, we want to do it according to a roadmap. There's lots of priorities out there. This is a new technology. When is the right time? Who do we have the resources? Do we have the skills, the capacities? With these technologies, you have to monitor the output over time because the output can change. That's just the nature of AI. And having shared quality standards is really important, especially when we're thinking about working with external vendors. And here you really need to have those resources. You need to have standards to implement. And this is just, this is an example data processing plan. So on GitHub, we've shared our framework and some tools that we've developed to sort of support the framework. And this is something that we use. A lot of the experiments we do are high priority experiments we do with an external vendor, and we have them document exactly what they're doing. So exactly the use case that we're looking at, where we want them to document exactly the data that they're working with. How is it compiled? What does it look like? What are the formats? What are the gaps? What's there, what's not there, and then exactly what AI or machine learning process they're using. How are they compiling the data for that process? What kind of labeling? How's the data labeled? Who is doing that labeling? Do we know what the model is trained on? So this is the kind of documentation that you kind of produce when you kind of experiment. Or this is what we're using anyway for our experiments. So this is an actual data processing plan that we are using for the experiment that we'll talk more about next, which is exploring computational description. So I hand it over to Caroline.
Yes, thank you. And so we're going to actually be talking about two experiments. We completed the first one at the end of 2023, and we're just completed the second experiment at this month. So we have very fresh data. You're the first audience, actually, outside of a few key stakeholders within the Library of Congress to hear about the second experiment and its results. So I'm very glad to see we have some of my colleagues from my part of the library watching this, so they can also see some of it. So in the first experiment, which we call Exploring Computational Description, that was the name of the experiment, it's in phases. So ECD1, we were testing multiple methods with ebook data and trying to understand the performance baselines for each of those models. We've been working with a vendor. We asked the vendor to work with 5 models. 3 of them had to be open source. I believe they chose all open source for the models they selected. And then also within the experiment, we were able to do initial review of data quality, working with catalogers at the Library of Congress to do that. In the second experiment, we provided them even more ebook data to train and tune models. In this case, they selected 3 models, and they put the output was in valid mark as opposed to just information text, as it were. Now we asked them to put it into valid mark data that we could actually see how it appeared as it properly should. And then prototyping HITL, human in the loop, cataloged systems workflows. Next question, next slide, please. So this was, these are the data for each experiment. The first one, ECD1, the ground truth data for testing and validation was from 4 different sources of both ebook files and associated catalog records. So CIP, or Cataloging and Publication, that's the program that's in my division, and so therefore near and dear to my heart. And we have over 100,000 of these ebook records and files that are come through the CIP program, CIP program. And we provided almost 14,000 of those to the vendor. We had over 5,800 open access titles, ebook format, 403 e-deposit. E-deposit is from the Copyright Office, and in the past, the U.S. Copyright Office required everything to be in a physical format. In the last decade or so, they've transitioned to accepting things in an electronic format. So we are having some of those titles in our collection of data that we provided to the vendor. Also legal reports, these are born digital and also OCR'd, physical things that were OCR'd that we provided to them. Legal reports are those documents prepared by law librarians within the Law Library of Congress, legal reference specialists in different areas, comparative law. And so that was another set of data that we could provide to them. In that first experiment, we wanted certain key metadata. We wanted author, title, creation date, issuance date, the form genre term, the subject term, and then the Library of Congress control number and the International Standard Book number, so LCCN and ISBN. We didn't curate the data. We didn't think about anything other than this is all electronic and you can deal with it as you will. And so it was probably unbalanced across genre and subjects, and we learned later it made it difficult for them to have as good results in certain ways, but that's for later discussion. As a Library of Congress, the majority of our content was English language, especially because it was some from the cataloging and publication program, U.S. copyright deposit, legal reports. These were all written in English. We did have some German and Spanish, especially in the cataloging and publication workflow. And we were working with both ebooks, in ebooks with both the EPUB version and the PDF. Now, in the second experiment, we actually gave them 100,000 more of our SIP records and files because that provided them with more data to work and test with. And that equates to about 1 terabyte of data, in case you're wondering how much data that might be. And also in this experiment, we wanted them to give us the data in a valid MARC format, structured data. And then you see the list of MARC fields and what each field has in it. And those are the data that the vendor was able to provide. Next slide, please. So in both experiments, as I said, they were asked to select a number of models types. So in ECD1, BERT, SPACY, some GPTs with variations. So for instance, natural language processing, NLP, name entity recognition, NER, large language models, which are LLMs. And then they also selected transformer type and non-transformer type. The types of classification, if you will, they use token classification. Token classification is identifying a word or a phrase, which is considered a token, and then being able to identify it as a particular place or particular content type. For instance, this word or phrase is the author. This word or phrase is the title. This word or phrase is the ISBN. And so that's a token. Text classification is the ability to take the text and analyze it, the machine analyzing it and identifying it as this phrase or this set of text actually means X, and being able to then match that with a structured vocabulary, a controlled vocabulary term, in our case, Library of Congress subject headings. And then data serialization is, of course, putting it into the right format. MARC format in this case. Human in the loop workflows or combining the artificial intelligence AI output and human review or verification. And that was an important feature of this. In ECD2, we asked them to identify models that could deliver the data with a user-facing prototype. And we asked them to use, again, LLMs. Primarily, they used Mistral AI. They did some large language model prompting. They used tools for prompts and formatting output. They used LongChain, DSpy, and they used 2 different libraries or frameworks. And they ran the experiments 30 times. So they kept like trying it and testing it and tuning it. They also use a vector search to match field values to authority records and ID related records as a way to identify whether or not something could be labeled as broader, narrower terms and related. So there were 3 different ways they were looking at this. Next slide, please.
Okay, so yeah, I can do this one. The results, which we'll have later slides sort of get more into this, but in the first experiment, we thought that, we were seeing results that really indicated that the human in the loop, the sort of having the cataloger verify the data that was coming out, that was going to be super important to any kind of future implementation of this, because the models in themselves, they don't output in high enough quality just to use. So the human in the loop was going to be super important, and we really learned that from the first experiment. And also the subjects. So the subject cataloging is really challenging, partly because of the data that we gave them, which was a small set comparatively. And we have a huge amount of data of subject terms that weren't all represented in that data. So it was, it's impossible for the machines to find patterns that weren't there. So that's sort of like very high level of what we learned in the first one, which led us to the second one to sort of really dig into the prototypes and really learn where in the cataloging workflow does it make sense to provide this machine generated data, and what other types of information, like confidence scores, like other data from other places, or what kind of image from the content itself, the sort of document is trying to process, what is helpful. And I think we end testing a lot of different methods and seeing which of these models or approaches work best for our systems and which could be practical for us. So we'll go through these more in a minute, but that's kind of the high level take and that we're going through. So is this one mine? Yeah.
Yes.
Yep. Yes. Yeah. So you can see here, this is the first results. So along the left, you see the field that the machines were looking for, and then the score. The F1 score is a common metric used in machine learning. It combines precision and recall. And 100 is the best, is sort of a fully complete and accurate result. So you see, we get sort of close when we look at field by field, and the light colored graphs are the GPT models that they tested just sort of as an add-on, because they came out in the middle of the program. So here's the second results using slightly different models, but you see we're still kind of in this 80% range, which is similar to what we were finding in the first, but this one we were really trying to create mark fields and subfields rather than just the term. And so we see, like, at about 80% accuracy, the Minstrel is the highest performing model here. And you can see these are the different fields that it created. That, there's some, something we could work with here, especially if we have catalogers reviewing the results.
So in the first experiment, we had this slide, which is my favorite slide. And those of my colleagues who have seen me present on this are like, oh, this slide again. But it's a fantastic slide that gives an example of the kinds of things that can go wrong in a machine learning project, especially when trying to assign subject headings. And so on the left, you see the title page of the book, and on the right, in the green shaded, those are the subject headings that matched the mark XML that the vendor was using as the ground truth. So the machine learning process matched in those where the green fields are. The white fields are where the machine learning process identified that did not match what was in the original MARC record. But you don't see are those fields that were in the original MARC record that the machine didn't. So there's a sort of a three-way overlap there. Now, the ones in white are always funny. People laugh at this, but berries, of course, the title page has the name Don Barry on it, and probably the word berry appears perhaps at the top of every page, as often does in a book where the author of the book appears regularly. So, of course, we're pretty sure that berries comes from Barry. We don't really know where cyberspace and beats persons comes from. That's pretty out there. the Oregon Clackamas River Valley and Willamette River, Oregon are terms that are actually semantically close to what was in the original MARC record, which you don't see here because it's not matched with anything. However, it does beg the question as to whether or not semantically close is good enough. And of course, we know that not every cataloger is going to select the same terms. And so one of the things we're trying to accomplish is in the experiments is sort of figuring out what is good enough and what is accurate enough and what's completely misleading. Someone looking for a book about berries would be very disappointed to find this book come up in their catalog hits search results. So that's problematic. The other thing is notable is that these are all linked to a URI in the id.loc.gov system in the linked data format. So the ones that have fiction next to them, that's a URI exists for married people fiction as a constructed and established term. But cyberspace fiction maybe does not. And also, how does it even know something is fiction? So that's a real jump, a real leap to figure that out. So things that we have to think about when it comes to what the powers of AI can and can't do. Next slide, please. Now, from the second result, and by the way, as you saw from what Abby was showing, 35% of subject accuracy in experiment 1, we got up to maybe 60% accuracy, and accuracy is the terms matched, right? So this is showing that about 43% of the manual review, so those other results were showing the automated processing review, but the manual review showed about 43% acceptable. But then there's the 5.6 too narrow and the 22% too broad. And then the 29% just flat out wrong. So that's slightly better, actually. 43% is better than it could be, I suppose, but it's still, we're still working on it. Next slide. And it's interesting to note what people considered wrong. So we had 20 catalogers reviewing about 400 records. So each cataloger was reviewing 20 records, and their job was to decide whether or not the predicted terms were acceptable, too broad, too narrow, or just wrong. And then they had a place for comment, and there's a slide that shows you what that looks like. But the interesting thing is that what catalogers considered to be wrong were the wrong subdivision order, or the subjects were too broad. For example, there needed to be a geographic subdivision, or that it was too narrow because the geographic subdivisions didn't include all of the places that were covering the work. Incorrect mark field. So this is really an interesting one about whether the term should have been a 610 instead of a 650, which one is for a corporate entity as a subject and the other is a topical subject heading. And then subdivisions being provided alone rather than the entire subject, which is also an interesting concept. So when you get into the rules about how to provide a pre-coordinated string of subject terms, perhaps that's making it a little more complicated for the machine learning process to be successful. Next slide. And this is a slide of, in our first experiment, the assisted cataloging human in the loop prototype. We didn't mention this at the earlier part of the slides, but in addition to coming up with 5 workflows to assess to use as models for the first experiment, we also asked them to come up with 2 assisted cataloging workflows. And after discussion with catalogers in a workshop environment to learn what the pain points were, it was determined that in any kind of cataloging, whether it's in a digital format or a print thing or the concept of what the pain points are, or what's most complicated, what takes the most intellectual effort, are of course subject heading assignment, and the other one of course is name authority work. So this is an example of the subject assistant, basically providing an opportunity for the cataloger to assess whether or not the subject terms that the machine learning process output were good enough for the title. being cataloged, and then providing other information to help them, such as extractive text, abstractive text, narrow terms, broader terms, but providing the cataloger sort of like a menu of options to help them decide what might be the appropriate subject, and then being able to assess that with the help of the prototype and see how closely it hit the original. Next slide.
And this is a screenshot from the second phase of the experiment, where I know it's a little hard to see, but there's the generated terms on the left, and then we have it's showing actually a related record. So to help the cataloger sort of make its decision, they, in this prototype, they're using machine learning to find related catalog records and showing the keywords and the subjects that were defined for those records to see if it would help the cataloger. And we got some feedback on that. This is a screenshot of the, it's zoomed in for the catalogers who are reviewing the output. So and you can see they've selected, the machines were able to select real subjects here with the LCSH. And then the catalogers were saying, is this acceptable, too broad, too narrow, or wrong? Was it just a hallucination? And then they could provide comments. So this is, kind of what a close-up of how they're reviewing. They did have a PDF or an image of the book that they were trying to catalog on the other side of their screen. In these two experiments, we've collected a lot of kind of information, one of them being this sort of quantitative performance data. This is a summary of data from the first experiment, showing the sort of F1 scores for all the different machine learning passes and fields. We're also getting a lot of really good information around sort of the practicalities of implementing these kinds of tools. This is what the contractor did, but I think this could be a really rich area to expand around in terms of like, what does practicality mean for your organization? And these are just kind of scores that the contractors did for the different models or approaches. So is the code reliable? What are the trade-offs on compute cost? Can we use our own training data? Can we train these models? Is it an active, documented, developer kind of friendly model? And these are real things that we have to consider if we want to implement it. I think we could also put pieces in here around, does it conform to our terms of service? Does it have the privacy and security safeguards in place? And then we also have the sort of feedback from our catalogers, our users in this case. And this is also really important to consider how would this fit into their workflows. And when we're putting all of these pieces together that we're learning through these experiments, we're thinking about assessing them in these different buckets. So is it responsible? So does the use case and the output that we're seeing from the use case, does it have the right trade-off of risks and benefits? Is there too much risk for error for it not to be worth it? Or could this really benefit our catalogers in a real way? And just sort of thinking through that and talking, with lots of different stakeholders about that. Is it compliant? So as a federal agency, U.S. federal agency, we have a lot of regulations about how technology can use data, especially our sort of user data, our collection data, and have the right security controls in there. So and a lot of these tools off the shelf don't really have those sort of guardrails in there. So that's an important thing to look at. Is it compliant to our sort of terms and services and our rules? And then also, does it support our principles? So the Library of Congress is currently working on sharing a statement of principles around how we want to use AI. And those have things like, is it for the public benefit? Does it increase equity? Does it protect rights, our intellectual property rights, our civil rights, our civil liberties? So, and that's a really important step in our experiment, does this support our catalogers? So this is an important step to look at before you move further into implementation. And then effective. So does it work? Does the quality match? Did we use our data to test it? Did we review the output with our staff? Does it meet our standards? That's, and that's going to be slightly different for each use case, but it's important to sort of verify that, because this is a brand new technology and there's a lot of claims about what it can do, but you really do have to test it in your specific use case. And then practical. So can we afford it? Can we integrate it into our workflows? And can it be, is it the right use? If we need stable, correct information over time, is this the right is this the right tool to use that? So these are, sort of the buckets we're using to help us kind of make decisions about whether or not we want to implement this. And I think for our this experiment that we've been talking about today, I think having that human in the loop, makes it possible to move forward. If we have our experts who are looking at it and looking at that data and improving it, then that's that could, sort of help our catalogers put their effort into the things that that would be a better use of their time. I think it also, as Caroline will talk about in a second, really helps raise questions about, when we are evaluating something, are we evaluating based on our current practice, or is this helping us learn about how we could do things differently in the future? And I think Caroline will talk about that a little bit now.
Right. And we're almost wrapping up, I promise. So some of the things that I've thought about is that we perhaps need to be thinking more about carefully constructing the training data. Half of the training data that we provided contained similar patterns of subject headings. Half of the training data we gave them contained unique ones. And it's very difficult to have a model make predictions when it doesn't have much similar patterns to work against. So curating it is important. What is really interesting is that catalogers have reacted more positively than expected to the results. They're actually more interested in it than afraid of it. And so when there's an opportunity to see how it works and that it's something they can provide feedback to doing more accurate, I think it helps provide some confidence in this. And then human in the loop prototypes showed the most promise for future experimentation. And that was sort of taking it from the first experiment. Next slide, please. And the questions that I keep having about this, and I kind of hinted a little bit at it, but that maybe faceted subject headings that are post-coordinated would be more successful than long subject strings for a machine learning process. And I think about that as partly because it's very difficult for a machine learning process to understand the syntax that we have created over time with these very long subject strings. The vocabulary is easy enough, if it's just one or two terms, it's easy enough to get wrong, I should say, but syntax makes it really hard. But there might also be certain subject categories that are more successful than others, and it'd be interesting to figure that out. Could a model be trained to accurately predict a Library of Congress classification or Dewey Decimal Classification? I know that the National Library of Germany has been working with Dewey to create what they call short Dewey numbers for medical titles. And it's very, very limited to medical titles. So that's an idea of, like, if you focus very specifically on something in a subject area, there might be more opportunity for accurate prediction. And then what will the library's policies and decisions be with respect to copyright concerns? That's really important for us. The U.S. Copyright Office is housed within the Library of Congress. Accuracy versus relevancy. And, obviously we want to make sure that someone's not going to be misled, for instance, a book about berries, and that's not going to help them, right? And then training data bias. So the more the junk in, junk out concept, garbage in, garbage out, right? So if we continually feed the model with data that is either inaccurate or harmful or misleading, and don't train it and tune it and correct it, then we'll continue to get these data biases. Next slide, please. And then finally, to talk about what our next steps are, we're just about to kick off our next experiment, working specifically with the cataloging and publication workflow. So the last two experiments have been working with ebooks, already cataloged, already published. This will be working with uncatalogued. We already have 100,000 or more, like many more, records in the SIP cataloging workflow, but we actually have the galleys that are associated with those. And so we can use the galleys, which are electronic, to they're digital, to be able to feed through the model. So they don't have the SIP data block, the cataloging publication data block that appears in many ebooks. There's nothing to cheat, if you will. They have to do it from without having that. Also, we want them to work in bid frame. So the output will be in a bid frame format, not in a MARC format. And then the ability for catalogers to work in the test instance of the bid frame editor to feed back into the system and back into the records, into the bid frame description to make quality decisions. We're going to be experimenting with 3 different AI approaches using pre-publication galleys, all with PDF, some minimal text provided. And we're going to, allow catalogers to review it in BibFrame Editor. We're also going to require more metadata beyond those 6 fields, things like series, whether it's illustrated or not, if there are bibliographical references and indexes, and summaries, tables of contents. There's other metadata that we're going to be asking for. Next slide, please.
Yeah, and this is just sort of a summary of the sort of roadmap, and then we're currently talking through sort of what the requirements for production would look like for the year after. So that's sort of a 4-year on-ramp to perhaps production, maybe more, because there's a lot that has to sort of be put in place infrastructure-wise to make sure these models are working in a production level. So that is our presentation, and we're happy to take any questions.
Thank you so much, Abigail and Caroline. That was really, really interesting to see some practical examples and see how far you've come and your plans for future experiments. Thank you so much. We have a question in the chat already, but for those who don't have not yet submitted any questions, you're welcome to. There's a Q&A button, and if you click on that, there's a panel to the right of your screen. Please write any questions you have. We wanted to ask our Chief of Library Services section, Sigrun Habermann, to speak for a moment, her reflections on what you've presented today, and also ask any questions she might have. So Sigrun, I've just activated your mic. You can normally unmute yourself now. Does that work? No. Nivert, maybe if you could try as well and see if that I can make presenter. Okay. So Sigrun, normally you should be able to.
Is it better now? Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Okay, great.
Perfect.
Thanks a lot, Natalie, for having left me that spot, the first one to actually be able to speak to you and to ask a question. So thanks a lot, Abigail and Caroline. I mean, this was really, really fascinating and very interesting. Congratulations, first of all, to you, because all these experiments and the big work that's behind that, you reach a lot of accomplishments already as well. I mean, if I see how you're moving ahead with that, and then being able to share also on your experiments, I think there are many things in there that we can learn from, that we can take on. So thank you so much for all that, for taking the time, also for preparing this presentation. And I really hope that it'll be useful also for other presentations that are to come. We would love to be in touch and hear more about the third experiment and everything else that's following as well. Here at our library, this is the United Nations Secretariat Library that's in Geneva. Our interest in applying AI usually goes towards United Nations official documents. So actually, while I was listening to you, I was getting some hope that could be a little less challenging maybe than what you are having actually at Library of Congress, because it's like a particular category of documents that are already somehow standardized. So I was actually thinking that could be something very positive actually, and faster maybe to wrap our heads around, how cataloging or indexing is what we're actually doing, could be helped with AI. And also thanks a lot for explaining all that with the HITL, the loop one. I mean, it seems quite obvious, but that there are actually models and approaches there that we could imitate. That's really great. So thanks a lot for sharing and for transmitting also those reflections, obviously, on the ethical use. I mean, you packed so much information in there. I think I'll have to go through and really extract, a lot of that. But what I also found that you transmitted well is this excitement that comes. It definitely got me excited about moving ahead with things. And voilà, so thanks a lot. I'm going to leave the more technical questions to my colleagues. I'm sure they will have some. But as a manager, I do have a question about the experience that you have in-house, right? For that, what kind of team do you have that actually works on that? I see that there are 2 different services, I guess, that are working together. But how do you just set this up? And what kind of skills did you already have that you then developed further? That would be my question. Thank you.
No, it's a very good question. And before I answer that question, I just want to mention, Natalie, I had a colleague from the Library of Congress text me separately that she's not able to get to ask any questions. So I don't know, perhaps other Library of Congress colleagues, anyone else who wants to ask questions may not be able to. It looks to be disabled. So I just wanted to mention that to you.
Okay, thank you. Yes, if you can hear me, there is a chat and there's a Q&A. Hopefully the Q&A is activated for you.
Both seem to be disabled. So
sorry about that. We will look into that right now.
So to go back to your question, Sigrun, by the way, I love that name. I just want to say, it's really important to consider, that the Library of Congress, first of all, is a very large agency. We have the Office of the Chief Information Officer, where Abby works, which manages almost all sort of the computing, technical, IT, everything related to, not everything, but most things related to technical computing and so on. And they would be the ones setting up the infrastructure for if we were to implement this for a production environment. Whereas my side of the house is sort of the library services part of the library. So all of the acquisitions, cataloging, reference, interlibrary loan, sort of preservation, all of those things that you think about with sort of typical library features and functions. And so it's really important that we were able to put our 2 sides of the house together to do this. More importantly, really important for this innovation space that Abby is involved with, to provide a sort of a space, a safe space, this whole ethical considerations thing, to be really responsible and considerate of all of the different aspects of this, and not try to force something, not try to rush something, have it in a place that's the data is sort of separate and apart. It's not going to be distributed everywhere before we have an opportunity to consider the copyright concerns or the privacy concerns, making sure we're training the data accurately and in a way that's going to be useful. So how those skills, I mean, so the catalog, so we have a vendor who's working with us. They are really the experts in sort of how to set up the machine learning process and the prototypes for that, and also help us to think about the best ways to test it, the best models that might work in the future, so that we can actually use that in our implementation processes, noting that it's maybe not just one model, it's multiple models working together. And then also the catalogers who are able to, they know what the standards are, they know what the quality should look like, and have them as part of that conversation, looking at it, not only to assess whether the output is accurate, but also to provide them a comfort level to say, nothing that we are gonna generate from this is going to go out there without your looking at this and making sure it's accurate. But the point of it really being also not to replace any of the work that they're doing. Perhaps it'll replace some of the more tedious aspects of what they're doing, but provide suggestions for them, so that as a way of speeding things up a little bit, so that they don't have to think about it always from scratch. Right now, catalogers use patterns a lot. If there's a book about something related to social sciences, they're going to look up related works about social sciences. How was that book cataloged? Well, this machine learning process is going to do it for them. That's one of the things that it did in this sort of vector searching, is these are other titles that are like that. Without them actually having to look for it, it's going to provide it and then provide the similar subject headings. That's sort of one of the things that this machine learning process prototype is doing. So understanding what the cataloger mindset is and thinking about how they can use those skills that they already have are ways that the skills and also the ways that the two sides of the house have been collaborating. So that was a long answer. I'm sorry.
And the only thing I'll add to that, that's all exactly right, is that I think it would be really difficult to have kind of fruitful experiments without both sides, without sort of the technical knowledge and the subject matter expertise together, and really having it look at the whole workflow rather than just the output. And I think the output, you've seen kind of the results. We're about 80% accurate, on some of the fields. And if we were only looking at the output, getting that better, we'd have to wait for new tools. But if we were looking at like we're looking at the whole workflow. So there's a lot to work with there to improve. And that would just be to have the collaboration be a true collaboration from the start, not just, having people review at the end, but having them sort of involved from the start. And I think that gives really fruitful results.
Great. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Sigrun.
On to the others.
Yeah. Yes, thank you. To those who cannot activate the Q&A button, we're truly sorry. I hope that you're able to still raise your hand if that's the case. And if you can raise your hand and have a question, please do. We'll make you a presenter so you can speak instead. We do have some questions though in the Q&A. So we understand some of you might have to leave. We're going to get through as many as we can, and you can watch the recording if you need to leave now. So thank you for those who have joined us. Let's get through some so that we can answer your questions. The very first one has come through from David, and he's asking, I'm curious about how this relates to data governance, but also especially getting buy-in and acceptance. How were these experiments contextualized among colleagues, understanding expectations, accuracy? How did you kind of address these concerns to get the experiments going?
Well, we in labs, we have an experiment process. So that sort of was in place before we started with the machine learning experiments. So that really helped. And that was, and we also had a contracting mechanism to work with external vendors. And I think it's really important here we're working with a vendor. It's not they're a small firm in the UK, and they're testing, a range of commercial tools, a range of open source tools, which I think is really important at this learning stage where you're not kind of locked into one option. Because there is a lot of differences in how data is treated, what kind of training and tuning can happen with the different models and approaches. So, but having those things in place helped us sort of move faster with the experiments for machine learning. But the sort of framework that I described is looking at specific use cases, and we had several use cases, and we're experimenting in a couple different ones besides this one, and those are sort of kind of the high priority use cases that decided by our senior management. And we have a risk assessment worksheet that we have that we fill out that sort of does some risk analysis of each of the use cases. And all of them are in the high risk category because they're making, authoritative records where accuracy is really important. And but we still pursued them anyway because we think that there will be, significant benefits if we can get it, if it will work. So, but also we're pursuing it in an experimental, small scale way, not just moving to production right away. But there is a governance layer that's sort of building up. That's sort of based on our normal IT governance that we have around, security, privacy, sort of making sure we're using taxpayer money responsibly. We have that in place, and AI, that all still applies to all of the AI tools. So that is, and there may be some special things for AI, especially around monitoring performance and additional infrastructure that's needed to do that, or tools that needed to do that sort of at the enterprise level that we don't really have yet. But I think the having sort of mechanisms to kind of explore are really important, and just sort of integrating the existing policies, around data privacy and security and sort of how things get selected. Those are all still apply. So we haven't had to do so much new stuff, but to sort of use what we have.
Thank you. I will read out two questions that are similar. So Adeline asks, are you planning to share one day your trained AI to the world? Would it be possible perhaps in an open access format? And Laura asks, are you planning to release an AI product other libraries could use? So a similar question there, if you have any remarks on that.
Well, I think right now, I mean, we are certainly getting the data. Some of the data that we're using now is copyrighted, so we're not obviously going to share that data. But in general, we do want to share as much as we can. And I think when I think of a product, I think more of like what we would actually produce is more kind of I think people say platform or framework, where we have, this machine learning kind of tool where the models will change. That's another important thing, is that the model, there's new models coming out every week. There's new tools coming out all the time. And the assumption is that those will change and we'll need to swap those in and out. But the workflows to get our data in, and then the models processing the data, and then the workflows to move the data where we want it to be, and then the workflows to monitor the data, and then have a feedback loop from what the experts are reviewing about the data, putting that back into the models to improve them. That is the kind of infrastructure that's not really that I think we'll be very happy to share once we get there. But right now it's the data and the documentation about exactly what models we're using, what performance we're getting. That I think will be the most fruitful thing to share, and then sharing sort of what our takes on our term for quality. So I think much like digitization, we have digitization standards that we share across the sector, and I wonder if there are standards around these these sort of very library focused tasks like cataloging or indexing or other things, metadata generation, that we can have some sort of shared understanding of what how we want to implement this when we do it in a library, and what the quality and authenticity sort of look like. I think that's the kind of thing, sharing how we do that will be really important.
Yeah. We have a few more questions, if you don't mind. We have Patrick asking, are the catalogers finding that this is saving time? And are you able to analyze how much time is saved through using AI for these tasks?
So one of the things that we are doing at this point is we are asking them how long they're taking to review, say, for instance, the 20 records. And it was really interesting, as I said earlier, 20 records per 20 people, right? 400 records. And some said it took them 2 hours to do the review for all of them. Some said it took them 10 hours to do. And I think a lot of it has to do with comfort level, with looking at a prototype and being able to assess and so on. So it seems very inauthentic in a way to really get a sense of how long it does take. Obviously, we want it to be something that would save time. And obviously, we would want it to be something where it's going to give them useful data that they can use to make assessments and evaluations. And as they do that work, become more comfortable with the sort of the prototype or the layout and sort of the tools that are made available through this prototype. But I think at this point, it's a little bit more complicated to really get a sense of how long it's going to take someone to use a machine learning method to do cataloging, just because the prototypes are very low fidelity. It's in a sort of a forced, inauthentic training set, not necessarily real world. I mean, it's real world insofar as these are books that need to be cataloged. They were cataloged. We already have the data to show what the ground truth was. Now they're looking at it with fresh eyes. So it's kind of a complicated answer, I guess, to say if we hope it's going to save time. I can say that. I don't know. Abby, do you want to have any things to say about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think they're not really doing the actual workflow that they would do yet. You know, this is in the next one we might be able to understand more. I can say in a different experiment where we're looking at summarization and kind of the features of some of these tools, where it not providing citations, it not provide, you know, the more complex the output, there's not necessarily traceability or explainability of how they came up with this. So that the people who are evaluating the quality, you know, there's still a lot of hallucinations, and those hallucinations look right. You know, you have to be an expert to kind of know if they're not correct. So it doesn't really save them time at this point. I think looking at it as like a modernization of the workflow. There's a lot of pieces there, not all AI, that can save time, but including these kind of tools where there's, you know, there can be kind of generated suggestions of what the data could be part of the sort of overall modernization. So I think the time saving, we don't have real evidence of that yet, but we hope that there will be. I mean, I think part of it is not necessarily, part of it is we're pursuing these because we have more and more content. The catalogers that we have, you know, we can't add 10 catalogers, you know, it's just not possible. So we want to be able to have our current catalogers sort of be able to deal with this deluge, you know, help them with the deluge and hopefully save time, or just have them feel more supported and give them more tools.
Yeah.
One thing that's important to note too is that the idea that AI is going to save time is actually misguided. In the short term, at least, it might actually take more time. The way as Abby said, a sort of a workflows and modernizing how we do things shifts, it's different things will take time. I don't think AI is going to make any job go away. It's this idea that, and I think one of the things that concerns catalogers or anybody else who think, oh my gosh, it's going to take my job. What am I going to do? They're replacing me with a machine. It's like, no, the machine can only do so much. The human and the intellectual, the analysis, the skills, the training that we've had and honed over these years is still very necessary. And so, but instead of maybe doing things in a one by one, there might be more opportunity for more, I don't know, I don't like to use the word batch processing. That's not quite what I mean, but that the way we think about things might be done in a different way. And it's an opportunity to do that. So yeah, I think it's important to know that AI is not necessarily going to be, at least in the short term, a true time saver, but it's something that if we don't take the time to do it and do it well, that it will never get better. So yeah, and we can't just add staff. That's hard too, right? So.
Yeah, some good reflections. Thank you. We know we're over time and some people had to leave. There were 2 questions left. If we could just look at them, if you have just like rapid fire answers to those. The first one is, have you dealt with issues around multilingualism? You did mention in your presentation a few languages there. So if you have any advice on multiple languages, especially at the UN, that's helpful to know. And then Dennis asks if you have any tips concerning workflow for HITL projects. I hope you might know what that means. And if you don't, we can ask Denny to elaborate. How did you ensure the technical staff could get their results checked by an appropriate SME in a timely manner? So that's a bit more of a technical one. I leave those 2 to you. Thank you very much.
So I'll tackle the language one. We, as I said, we're working with a corpus of English language material because the majority of the material published in the United States, of course, is English. So we have that already. I would say, however, that any corpus you have, if you have a set of documents, it's very important that it's a large set of documents in a certain language, that the machine learning process can any machine learning process can be trained to do that. I know that there's work in Israel at Bar Ilan University to look at machine learning for Hebrew, for instance, possibly Yiddish as well. I have colleagues at the Library of Congress who ask this question often because they have a lot of non-Latin script languages they work with, sort of what we call the JACFI, or Japanese, Arabic, Chinese, Korean, Yiddish, Hebrew, not necessarily in that order. We also have Russian and other Slavic languages that use Cyrillic that also, how can they use the machine learning process? And it really does take digital material, something that the machine learning process can ingest. Books don't work so well with this process. So if you have content in a digital format, enough of it that can be used to train a model, there's really no reason, as I know, that the machine learning process couldn't work for those. But again, it takes like a large corpus of it. And also, in our case, we had all the catalog records that go along with those ebook files to use as the ground truth data. If you don't have the catalog records and you're just running the models through, the kind of review that you would have to do to identify whether or not these models selected the right kind of information, the tokens, if you will, what is the author, what is the title, et cetera, might be a different way of having to go about that review. But I don't think it's impossible. It just really has to do with how much data you have to work with. Do you want to say anything about that, Abby?
No, I think that's right. I think the challenges we've had, but I think there are other libraries that are working on these. I think the National Library of Norway is working on Norwegian, for example, to especially large language models and other native and Inuit sort of languages that they are prevalent in their collection. So I think that is, definitely a concern. We're starting with English because that's our biggest, but I think we have lots of languages and we would be interested in looking at machine learning because catalogers who catalog in all these languages are, also hard to retain and or rehire. So so the human in the loop question, I think the partnership from the beginning, I think that is super important to get the review out, to get the subject matter expertise from the beginning. And I think Caroline mentioned workflows. So like engaging with the subject matter experts on the data, getting there. Caroline, like I could not do this without Caroline. She knows what all the fields mean, what the anomalies might look like, what a cataloger's workday looks like. This is, these are things that the technical staff don't know, and we need to work together to come up with approaches. So doing that from the very, very beginning is super important. And I think in terms of the data that is being given to the catalogers to review, that some of that came out of our requirements of what we were looking for. We wanted to look at the top 6 fields because that's kind of the most important, that kind of could make a starter record that the cataloger could then improve. And part of it is also choosing different models that have different features. So some of you saw some have this confidence score where not all models do that, but some models can sort of self-report if they are confident in their suggestion or not. And those kinds of decisions were really helpful when we know we're going with the humans in the loop approach, selecting those models that can have those features.
Thank you.
Is there another question that we missed?
Nope, those were the 2 final ones. No, I think we're good. And thank you so much for the extra time you've spent with us. Thank you to everyone who joined us. and stayed till the end. We hope that this was a useful session for you. We'll make sure to send the recording and the PDF version of the slides. Thank you, Abigail and Caroline, for agreeing to do that. So that if you have you want to look into any more details more carefully, you can do that. Again, thank you for joining from wherever you are, either Library of Congress or the UN System Libraries. And we hope to see you again soon and keep in touch to see what you're up to. Until next time, take care and bye for now.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.